The story opens with the protagonist, an experienced journalist named Thomas, recounting his arrival at the abandoned town of Black Hollow. The town had been a thriving community decades ago, but one fateful night, all the residents vanished without a trace. The mystery surrounding the town's sudden abandonment had always intrigued Thomas, and when he was assigned to cover a story on urban legends, he knew this was his chance to uncover the truth. As he drives through the dense, overgrown forest that surrounds Black Hollow, the narrow road seems to close in on him, the trees forming a tunnel that blocks out the sun. The deeper he goes, the more the outside world seems to fade away, leaving him with an unsettling sense of isolation. Upon reaching the outskirts of Black Hollow, Thomas feels an immediate shift in the atmosphere. The town is eerily quiet, as if the very air is holding its breath. His car engine cuts off unexpectedly, and despite multiple attempts, it refuses to start again. Forced to continue on foot, Thomas steps out of the car and is greeted by the unsettling sight of the town's entrance, a rusty, creaking gate barely hanging on its hinges. Beyond the gate, the town sprawls out in a state of decay, with dilapidated buildings leaning precariously as if they could collapse at any moment. Weeds have overtaken the streets, and the windows of the houses are dark, their glass shattered or covered in thick layers of dust and grime. As Thomas walks through the deserted streets, the silence is almost oppressive. His footsteps echo off the crumbling walls, the only sound in an otherwise dead town. Yet, there's something off about the silence. It's too heavy, too unnatural, as if the town itself is listening. He can't shake the feeling of being watched, of unseen eyes tracking his every move. The hairs on the back of his neck stand on end, and he constantly finds himself glancing over his shoulder, expecting to see someone, or something, lurking in the shadows. But the streets remain empty, the buildings lifeless. In an attempt to shake off the growing unease, Thomas focuses on his task. He decides to start his investigation at the town's center, where the old town hall stands, its once grand facade now crumbling and overgrown with ivy. As he approaches the building, he notices a faint, almost imperceptible smell in the air. A mix of damp earth and something metallic, like rust or blood. The scent sends a chill down his spine, and he hesitates before pushing open the heavy, creaking door. Inside the town hall is a mausoleum of forgotten history. Dust motes dance in the pale light filtering through the cracked windows, and the air is thick with the scent of decay. Thomas's footsteps echo ominously in the vast empty space, and the floorboards groan under his weight, as if protesting his intrusion. He explores the ground floor, finding nothing but abandoned offices and empty rooms. However, in the back of his mind, there's a growing sense of wrongness, a feeling that he's not alone. As Thomas ascends the creaking staircase to the second floor, the feeling intensifies. Each step he takes feels heavier, as if something is trying to hold him back, urging him to leave. But his curiosity drives him forward. On the second floor, he finds the mayor's office, the door slightly ajar. He pushes it open, and the first thing that strikes him is the state of the room. It's untouched, as if frozen in time. Papers are scattered across the desk. A cup of coffee sits on a coaster, its contents long dried up, and a calendar on the wall is still turned to the month when the town was abandoned. As he steps further into the room, a cold draft brushes past him, sending a shiver down his spine. The sense of being watched becomes almost unbearable, and Thomas's breath catches in his throat. He turns quickly, scanning the room, but there's no one there, just as he's about to dismiss it as paranoia. He notices something out of the corner of his eye, a shadow, darker than the rest, lingering in the corner of the room. It's formless, yet there's an undeniable sense of presence, as if it's aware of him, watching him with unseen eyes. Before he can react, the shadow flickers and disappears, leaving Thomas with a racing heart and a creeping sense of dread. He realizes that this town is not as empty as it seems. There's something here, something that defies explanation, and it's only just beginning to reveal itself. The town, once merely an intriguing mystery, now feels like a place of malevolent intent, a place where the boundaries between the living and the dead are disturbingly thin. With every nerve on edge, Thomas knows that leaving now would be the wise choice. But the journalist in him refuses to back down. He steels himself, determined to uncover the truth, no matter the cost. Little does he know, the deeper he digs, the more the town will grip him in its cold, unyielding embrace, pulling him closer to the heart of its dark secret, a secret that may very well consume him. As Thomas continues his exploration of Black Hollow, the unsettling events that he initially tried to rationalize begin to escalate, weaving a web of terror that tightens around him with each passing day. The town, once just a backdrop to his investigation, now feels like a living, breathing entity with a malevolent will of its own. It starts with the small things. Items in his temporary lodging, a decrepit old house on the edge of town, seem to shift positions when he's not looking. At first, he brushes it off as his mind playing tricks on him, perhaps due to the stress of the investigation. A book that he clearly remembers placing on the table ends up on the floor, its pages splayed open as if someone had been reading it in his absence. A chair that was pushed against the wall is now slightly angled toward the center of the room, as if someone had recently been sitting in it. These incidents are minor, almost laughable in their mundanity, but they leave a cold pit of unease in his stomach. The unease deepens when he starts hearing things. It begins at night, in the dead silence that envelops the town after dusk. Lying in bed, Thomas hears faint noises. Soft, barely perceptible whispers that seem to drift through the walls. At first, he convinces himself that it's just the wind, perhaps moving through the cracks in the old wooden structure. But as the nights go on, the whispers become more distinct, more intentional. They no longer seem like random sounds, but rather like voices, speaking in hushed tones, just out of reach of understanding. The words are garbled, as though they are being spoken underwater or through layers of heavy fabric, but the tone is unmistakably menacing. Sleep becomes an elusive luxury as the whispers invade his nights, leaving him restless and on edge. The lack of sleep begins to take its toll, blurring the lines between his waking life and the dreams that plague him. The dreams are vivid, unsettlingly real, and always the same. He's walking through the town, but it's not the Black Hollow he knows. In the dream, the town is alive with people. Yet there's something off about them. Their faces are blurred, their movements jerky and unnatural, as if they are marionettes being controlled by invisible strings. They speak to him in those same whispered tones, their words echoing the voices he hears at night. But the meaning remains just out of reach. In these dreams, the town appears to be caught in a time loop, replaying the same events over and over again. The people go about their daily routines, but with an eerie, robotic precision that sends chills down Thomas's spine. The dream always ends the same way, with him standing in the town square, surrounded by the faceless figures as they all turn to face him in unison. Their heads snap toward him with a grotesque, unnatural speed, and though he cannot see their eyes, he feels their gaze pierce through him, cold and accusing. He wakes up drenched in sweat, the echoes of the dream clinging to him long after he has left the bed. During the day, Thomas finds himself drawn to the places he saw in his dreams. The buildings, the streets, all match perfectly with what he's seen during the night, down to the smallest detail. It's as if his mind is mapping the town in his sleep, filling in the gaps of what he hasn't yet explored in reality. This realization sends a shiver of dread through him. How can he dream of places he hasn't seen? He starts to suspect that the town is seeping into his subconscious, merging his thoughts with its own dark history. As his investigation deepens, the town begins to show its true nature. Thomas notices figures at the edges of his vision, fleeting shadows that disappear when he tries to focus on them. He hears footsteps behind him, only to turn around and find empty streets. The whispers that once plagued his nights begin to follow him during the day, faint and distant at first, but growing louder and more insistent with each passing hour. They seem to be calling his name, beckoning him deeper into the town's labyrinth of secrets. The turning point comes when he discovers an old photograph in the town library, hidden between the pages of a dusty, forgotten book. The photograph is of the town square, taken decades ago, and at first glance it seems unremarkable. But as Thomas examines it more closely, he feels his blood run cold. In the background, among the townspeople, he spots a figure standing in the shadows. Its face is blurred, just like in his dreams, but its posture is unmistakable. The figure is watching him, just as it has in his nightmares. The discovery leaves him shaken. The figure in the photograph, though indistinct, is all too familiar. It is the same presence he has felt following him, watching him, and now it has crossed the boundary between dream and reality. Thomas realizes with growing horror that whatever haunts this town is not just a figment of his imagination. It is real, and it is aware of him. His attempts to leave the town are thwarted by inexplicable events. The roads out of Black Hollow seem to loop back on themselves, leading him in circles no matter which direction he takes. His car, which once started effortlessly, now refuses to work, as if the town itself is conspiring to keep him trapped. The feeling of being hunted becomes unbearable, with the whispers now a constant, maddening presence, swirling around him like a suffocating fog. Thomas's grip on reality begins to slip as the town's hold on him tightens. The world outside Black Hollow fades into a distant memory, and the once clear line between what is real and what is imagined becomes hopelessly blurred. The small town that was once just a mystery to solve is now a living nightmare. And Thomas is beginning to fear that he will never escape its clutches. The whispers, the shadows, the figure in the photograph. They are all pieces of a puzzle that he is terrified to complete, knowing that the truth might be more than his mind can bear. As the days drag on in Black Hollow, Thomas's mind begins to unravel under the relentless pressure of fear and uncertainty. The town, with its eerie silence and shadowed corners, has become a maze of paranoia and dread. The events that have transpired, objects moving on their own, whispers that follow him, and the nightmarish visions, have eroded his once firm grasp on reality. The line between what is real and what is imagined is no longer clear, and Thomas is increasingly haunted by the possibility that he is losing his sanity. The isolation of Black Hollow, combined with the constant, oppressive atmosphere, begins to wear down Thomas's psyche. He finds himself questioning everything, his memories, his perceptions, even his own thoughts. The once logical and analytical mind that drove him to pursue journalism now feels like a treacherous labyrinth, where every path leads to deeper confusion and fear. The whispers, now a constant companion, seem to come from within his own mind, echoing his doubts and amplifying his fears. In an effort to regain some semblance of control, Thomas immerses himself in the investigation, hoping that uncovering the truth will provide a way out. However, the more he delves into the town's history, the more fragmented and contradictory the information becomes. He finds records of the town's past residents, but the details are inconsistent. Names, dates, and events seem to shift and change as he reads, as if the very history of Black Hollow is in flux. Every piece of evidence he uncovers only raises more questions, driving him further into a state of confusion and despair. Thomas begins to distrust everyone and everything. The town, once merely abandoned, now feels hostile, as if it is actively working against him. The few contacts he manages to reach outside the town provide little comfort. Their voices, once familiar and reassuring, now sound distant and distorted, as though they are speaking to him through a thick veil of fog. He starts to wonder if they are even real, or if they are just more figments of his deteriorating mind. The nightmares that plague him at night begin to bleed into his waking hours. He starts seeing things that shouldn't be there, glimpses of shadowy figures standing in doorways, faces peering at him from the windows of abandoned buildings, and reflections in mirrors that do not match his own. The boundaries between dream and reality crumble, leaving him in a constant state of terror. He can no longer trust his own senses, and every shadow, every flicker of movement becomes a potential threat. One night, as he lies in bed, unable to sleep, Thomas hears a noise coming from the hallway, a slow, deliberate creaking, as if someone is walking toward his room. His heart races as the sound grows louder, closer. He holds his breath, his body rigid with fear, as the footsteps stop right outside his door. The doorknob turns slowly, but the door does not open. The silence that follows is suffocating, and Thomas feels as though his heart might stop from the sheer tension of it. When the door finally opens, there is nothing there, just the dark, empty hallway. But Thomas knows he is not alone. He feels a presence, cold and malevolent, watching him from the shadows. It's the same presence he has felt since arriving in Black Hollow, the same entity that haunts his dreams. He can no longer deny that something is stalking him, something that feeds on his fear and thrives in the darkness. As the days turn into weeks, Thomas's isolation becomes complete. He avoids leaving his temporary lodging as much as possible, fearing what he might encounter outside. The town's silence is no longer just eerie, it's oppressive, crushing him under its weight. The whispers have grown louder, more insistent, filling his mind with dark thoughts and twisted visions. They speak to him of despair, of hopelessness, of the futility of his struggle. They tell him that there is no escape, that he is already lost, consumed by the town's curse. In his desperation, Thomas begins to suspect that there is a conspiracy against him, perhaps orchestrated by the town itself, or by some malevolent force that controls it. He finds cryptic messages scrawled on walls and in old notebooks, messages that seem to be warnings, but are too vague and fragmented to decipher. They speak of a secret buried in the heart of the town, a truth so terrible that it drove the residents to madness and destruction. The idea that he might be on the verge of uncovering this secret gives him a flicker of hope, but it's quickly extinguished by the realization that the town will do anything to keep it hidden. Thomas's paranoia reaches its peak when he discovers that the voices he has been hearing might not be just in his head. He begins to record the sounds in his room, hoping to capture proof of the whispers that torment him. When he plays back the recordings, what he hears chills him to the bone. The whispers are there, clear and unmistakable, but they are saying things he cannot remember hearing. They speak his name, mockingly, and repeat phrases that echo his darkest thoughts. They taunt him, telling him that he will never leave Black Hollow, that he is doomed to become part of its dark legacy. The discovery pushes Thomas to the brink. He is no longer sure if the whispers are real, if they are a product of his own mind, or if the town itself is speaking to him, driving him mad. The fear, once just a gnawing sensation in the pit of his stomach, now consumes him entirely. He begins to see the town not just as a place, but as a living entity, a predator that has ensnared him in its web, feeding on his fear and despair. In his increasingly fragile state, Thomas starts to question his own existence. He wonders if he was ever truly alive, or if he has been a ghost all along, trapped in a town that exists somewhere between life and death. The more he tries to unravel the mystery, the more entangled he becomes in the town's dark history. His sense of self erodes, and he begins to lose touch with reality. He can no longer tell if he is awake or dreaming, if the things he sees are real, or just the manifestations of his crumbling mind. Thomas's isolation, paranoia, and fear reach a crescendo as the town tightens its grip on him. The darkness inside him grows, feeding on the terror that Black Hollow has instilled in him. He is no longer just a journalist investigating a story. He is a man on the edge, teetering on the brink of madness, with no way to distinguish between the horrors outside and the demons within. The town has taken everything from him, his sanity, his sense of reality, and now perhaps his very soul. As the days in Black Hollow stretch into an agonizing blur, Thomas's grip on reality deteriorates at an alarming rate. What started as an unsettling investigation into a mysterious town has now become a full-fledged descent into madness. The town's oppressive atmosphere, with its perpetual gloom and eerie silence, has infiltrated every corner of his mind, leaving him in a constant state of fear and confusion. The once distinct boundary between reality and nightmare has dissolved, plunging Thomas into a waking horror from which there is no escape. The descent begins with small but terrifying shifts in perception. Thomas starts to see things that defy logic, flickering shadows that seem to have a life of their own, walls that breathe as if the town itself is alive, and reflections in mirrors that don't match his own movements. The town has become a twisted, malevolent entity, and Thomas feels as though it's trying to absorb him, to make him part of its dark, cursed history. Each time he attempts to rationalize what he's experiencing, the town retaliates with even more disturbing manifestations, as if mocking his efforts to cling to sanity. One night, Thomas wakes to find himself standing in the middle of the street, disoriented and freezing, with no memory of how he got there. The town is shrouded in a thick, unnatural fog that seems to pulse with a life of its own, obscuring his surroundings and amplifying his fear. As he stumbles back toward his temporary lodging, the fog closes in around him, suffocating and disorienting. His breath comes in ragged gasps, his heart pounding in his chest as the whispers that once plagued his nights now seem to emanate from the fog itself, swirling around him in a cacophony of sinister voices. They call his name, their tone mocking and cruel, and Thomas is gripped by a primal fear that he is being hunted. Back in the safety of his lodging, Thomas's relief is short-lived. The walls of the house, once merely old and decaying, now seem to pulse with a malevolent energy. Objects in the house begin to move on their own. Doors creak open and slam shut. Chairs scrape across the floor as if dragged by invisible hands, and windows rattle violently despite the absence of wind. Thomas tries to barricade himself in his room, but the sense of security he seeks is elusive. The house itself has turned against him, and there's no place where he can escape its menacing presence. As his paranoia deepens, Thomas begins to suspect that the town is trying to communicate with him, or worse, trying to claim him. He starts to receive cryptic messages, scrawled on the walls in what appears to be his own handwriting, etched into the wood of the floorboards, and even appearing in the condensation on the windows. These messages are fragmented and incoherent, but they all convey the same disturbing sentiment. You cannot leave. You are ours now. The realization that the town is aware of him, that it is actively manipulating his environment, drives Thomas to the edge of insanity. The hallucinations grow more intense. Thomas begins to see the townspeople from his dreams, their blurred faces now disturbingly clear, yet still devoid of life and emotion. They appear at random, standing in the corners of rooms, peering through windows, or simply watching him from the shadows. Their presence is suffocating, and Thomas feels as though they are closing in on him, their blank, soulless eyes boring into him with silent accusations. He tries to engage with them, to demand answers, but they remain silent, their gazes unrelenting and filled with a cold, inexplicable hatred. Desperate to escape, Thomas makes repeated attempts to leave Black Hollow, but the town seems to conspire against him at every turn. The roads loop back on themselves, leading him in endless circles. His car, once a reliable means of escape, now refuses to start, its engine dead, as if drained of life. On foot, he finds himself inexplicably returned to the town's center. No matter which direction he takes, the sense of entrapment is overwhelming, and Thomas begins to feel as though he is not just trapped in Black Hollow, but in a nightmarish version of reality that exists solely to torment him. The fear that once gnawed at the edges of his consciousness now consumes him entirely. Thomas's thoughts become increasingly fragmented, his mind a chaotic storm of paranoia and terror. He starts to question his own existence, wondering if he has become one of the town's ghosts, doomed to wander its cursed streets for eternity. The line between his own thoughts and the whispers that plague him is now completely blurred, and Thomas can no longer distinguish between his own voice and the voices that seem to echo from the very walls of the town. As the town tightens its grip on him, Thomas begins to lose track of time. Days blend into nights in a disorienting cycle of fear and confusion. The sun no longer rises in Black Hollow, at least not for him. The perpetual darkness that envelops the town mirrors the growing darkness within him, as he spirals deeper into madness. Sleep offers no respite. The nightmares that once haunted his nights have now become his waking reality. The townspeople, once mere apparitions, now seem to reach out to him, their cold, lifeless hands brushing against his skin, leaving him shivering and drenched in cold sweat. In a final, desperate attempt to break free, Thomas confronts the heart of the town, the old crumbling church at its center, a place that has loomed in the background of his nightmares. The church, once a place of solace and sanctuary, now exudes an aura of malevolence. Its spire, jutting into the dark sky like a dagger. The air around it is thick with the scent of decay, and something more sinister, a smell that reminds Thomas of blood and charred flesh. As he steps inside, the doors slam shut behind him with a deafening bang, trapping him in the heart of the town's darkness. Inside, the church is a grotesque parody of its former self. The pews are overturned, the altar defiled, and the walls are covered in a strange pulsating growth that seems almost alive. The air is thick with the sound of whispers, louder now than ever before, and Thomas can barely think as they fill his mind with their relentless, insidious chatter. In the center of the room stands a figure, shrouded in shadow, its face obscured. The figure is familiar, and as Thomas approaches, he realizes with growing horror that it is himself. Or rather, a twisted, distorted version of him. Its eyes empty, and its expression one of cold malice. The confrontation is brief and terrifying. The figure speaks to him in a voice that is both his own and not his own, telling him that he has always belonged to Black Hollow, that he was always destined to end up here. The words resonate with a chilling truth that Thomas cannot deny. He feels the last shreds of his sanity slipping away as the figure reaches out to him, its touch cold and final. The whispers crescendo into a deafening roar, and Thomas's vision blurs as he is pulled into the darkness. The downward spiral is complete. Thomas is no longer the man he once was. He is now a part of Black Hollow, his mind and soul consumed by the town's ancient curse. The terror that he once sought to uncover has now become his reality, and there is no escape from the madness that has claimed him. The town, with its endless whispers and shadowed corners, has won. Black Hollow has taken yet another soul, and Thomas, like the countless others before him, is lost to the darkness forever. Thomas' descent into madness reaches a fever pitch as he becomes obsessed with uncovering the truth behind Black Hollow's dark past. The town, now a twisted labyrinth of terror, seems to mock his every attempt to understand its mysteries. His once rational mind, now frayed and fragile, clings to the hope that there is a solution, a way out of the nightmare that has consumed him. But each clue he uncovers only deepens the enigma, twisting reality into an incomprehensible puzzle that threatens to drive him over the edge. The discovery of an old, weathered diary in the town's decaying library marks the beginning of Thomas's final, desperate quest for answers. The diary, belonging to a long-deceased resident, is filled with cryptic entries that chronicle the last days of the town before it was abandoned. The handwriting is erratic, growing more unhinged with each page, as if the author was slowly losing their mind, just as Thomas is now. The entries speak of strange occurrences, of voices that seem to come from the walls, and of shadowy figures that appeared in the dead of night. The diary's final pages are stained with what looks like dried blood, and the last entry ends abruptly, mid-sentence, as if the author had been interrupted by something unspeakable. The diary offers hints but no clear answers, and Thomas finds himself trapped in a cycle of hope and despair. He scours the town for more clues, driven by the belief that if he can piece together the town's history, he can break free of its curse. But the town itself seems to conspire against him, warping his perceptions and twisting reality until he can no longer trust his own senses. Objects that once seemed familiar now appear alien and threatening. The streets, once straightforward, have become a disorienting maze that leads him in circles. The town has become a living nightmare, where nothing is as it seems, and every step brings him closer to the brink of madness. The cryptic messages that Thomas has been finding, scrawled on walls, etched into floorboards and appearing in the condensation on windows, begin to take on a more sinister tone. They no longer just warn him, they taunt him, mocking his efforts to escape. "You will never leave. You belong to us." These words, repeated over and over, drive a cold spike of fear into Thomas's heart. He starts to wonder if the town is sentient, if it has a will of its own, and if that will is intent on keeping him trapped forever. The possibility that he might never escape, that he is doomed to wander Black Hollow for eternity, fills him with a dread so profound that it nearly paralyzes him. As Thomas delves deeper into the mystery, he begins to experience terrifying visions that blur the line between the past and the present. He sees glimpses of the town's former residents, their faces twisted in agony, as they relive the horrors that befell them. These visions are so vivid, so real, that Thomas can feel their pain, their despair, as if it were his own. The boundary between his mind and theirs begins to dissolve, and he starts to fear that he is not just uncovering the town's history. He is becoming part of it. The visions grow more intense, more frequent, until Thomas can no longer distinguish between them and reality. He finds himself standing in places he doesn't remember walking to, seeing events unfold that he knows he shouldn't be able to witness. It's as if time itself has unraveled in Black Hollow, and he is caught in the middle of it, reliving the town's darkest moments over and over again. The terror of these experiences is overwhelming, but even more horrifying is the realization that he might be losing his identity, becoming just another lost soul in the town's long, cursed history. Desperation drives Thomas to confront the enigma head-on. He returns to the town's church, the place where he first felt the full weight of Black Hollow's darkness. The church, once a place of sanctuary, is now a twisted ruin, its walls covered in the same pulsating growth that he saw before. The air inside is thick with the stench of decay and something far worse, a smell that Thomas now recognizes as the scent of death. The whispers that have haunted him since his arrival are louder here, more insistent, as if the very walls of the church are alive with the voices of the damned. In the church's basement, Thomas discovers a hidden chamber, sealed for decades and untouched by time. The air is cold and damp, and the walls are lined with strange arcane symbols that seem to pulse with a malevolent energy. In the center of the chamber stands an altar, upon which lies an ancient, tattered book. The book is bound in a leather that feels unsettlingly warm to the touch, and its pages are filled with writing in a language Thomas cannot read. Yet, as he turns the pages, he begins to understand. Through some dark, inexplicable force, the meaning of the words seeps into his mind. The book tells the story of a pact made long ago between the town's founders and something that should not exist. An entity older than time, malevolent and hungry for souls. In exchange for prosperity, the town's leaders offered up the souls of their descendants, condemning Black Hollow to an eternity of darkness. The pact was sealed with blood, and the town was bound to the entity forever, a living tomb where the souls of the damned are trapped, reliving their torment for all eternity. Thomas realizes with a growing sense of horror that the town has been feeding on his fear, drawing him deeper into its web with each passing day. The voices, the visions, the nightmares, they are all part of the entity's plan to claim him, to add his soul to its collection. The realization hits him like a physical blow. He is not just an investigator, he is a sacrifice, drawn here by forces beyond his control, destined to become part of the town's cursed history. In a final desperate attempt to break the cycle, Thomas decides to destroy the book, hoping that it will sever the town's connection to the entity. But as he raises the book to cast it into the fire, the whispers rise to a deafening roar, and the shadows in the room come alive, reaching out to him with cold, clawed hands. The room begins to spin, and Thomas feels his mind unraveling as the entity fights to retain its hold on him. His vision blurs, and for a moment, he sees the faces of all those who came before him, their eyes hollow and pleading, as if begging him to end their suffering. With a cry of defiance, Thomas throws the book into the fire. The flames leap up, consuming the ancient pages, and the room is filled with a blinding light. The whispers turn to screams, and Thomas falls to the ground, clutching his head as the entity's rage tears through his mind. The pain is unbearable, and he feels as though his very soul is being ripped apart. But just as quickly as it began, the light fades, and the room falls silent. Thomas lies on the cold stone floor, his body trembling and his mind reeling. The book is gone, reduced to ashes, and the symbols on the walls have faded into nothingness. The air is still. The oppressive presence that once filled the church now vanished. For the first time since his arrival, Thomas feels a sense of relief, a faint glimmer of hope that he might have broken the curse. But as he pulls himself to his feet and stumbles out of the church, the reality of his situation begins to set in. The town, though quiet, is still there. Its darkened streets and crumbling buildings standing as a silent testament to the horrors that have taken place. The enigma, though partially unraveled, still lingers, and Thomas knows deep down that the entity is not truly gone. The town remains a trap, its darkness waiting to claim the next soul that dares to venture too close. As Thomas walks through the empty streets, the silence is almost deafening. He can feel the town watching him, waiting, and he knows that his time is running out. The entity may have been weakened, but it is not defeated, and the curse of Black Hollow remains. The unbearable enigma of the town continues to haunt him, and as the first rays of dawn break through the fog, Thomas realizes, with a sinking heart, that the nightmare is far from over. Thomas's journey through Black Hollow reaches its terrifying crescendo as he confronts the heart of the town's darkness. Every step he takes is laden with the weight of the horrors he has endured, the fear and despair that have consumed him since he first arrived. The town, once a mere backdrop to his investigation, has become a living nightmare, its malevolent presence tightening around him like a noose. The whispers, the shadows, and the visions that have haunted him all lead to this moment, an inevitable confrontation with the entity that holds Black Hollow in its grasp. Driven by a desperate need to end the torment, Thomas returns to the church, the place where he first felt the true weight of the town's curse. The church, now a decrepit ruin, looms before him, its twisted spire clawing at the sky like the fingers of a dying man. The air around it is thick with an unnatural chill, and the very ground seems to pulse with a dark, malevolent energy. The whispers that have followed him since his arrival rise to a fever pitch as he approaches, filling his mind with a cacophony of voices that threaten to drown out his thoughts. They speak in 100 different tones, some pleading, some mocking, but all filled with a cold, unyielding malice. Inside, the church is a grotesque reflection of its former self. The walls, once adorned with symbols of hope and faith, are now covered in a black, pulsating growth that seems to writhe as if alive. The pews are overturned, and the altar is a twisted mockery of what it once was, now stained with dark, congealed blood. The air is thick with the stench of decay, and something far worse, a smell that Thomas now recognizes as the scent of death and corruption, of something ancient and evil. The whispers intensify, becoming a constant, maddening drone that seems to come from the very walls of the building. In the center of the room, illuminated by a flickering, otherworldly light, stands the figure that has haunted Thomas's nightmares. It is shrouded in darkness, its form indistinct and ever-shifting, as if it is made of the very shadows that have plagued him. The figure's face is hidden, but its presence is overwhelming, radiating a cold, suffocating fear that grips Thomas's heart with an iron fist. This is the entity that has claimed Black Hollow, the source of the town's curse, and it has been waiting for him. The figure does not speak in words, but its intent is clear. It reaches out to Thomas, its hand an extension of the darkness that surrounds it. And with that gesture, Thomas is flooded with a wave of memories that are not his own. He sees the town as it once was, a thriving community full of life and hope. But he also sees the moment when that hope was extinguished. The moment when the town's leaders made their pact with the entity, sacrificing their own descendants to ensure their own prosperity. The horror of that moment The sheer depth of their betrayal is more than Thomas can bear. He feels their guilt, their fear, as if it were his own, and it threatens to crush him. But the entity is not content with showing him the past. It forces him to confront his own darkest fears, the truths he has buried deep within himself. He sees his failures, his regrets, and the pain he has caused others. The entity feeds on his despair, growing stronger with each revelation until Thomas is left with nothing but the cold, hard truth. He is not a hero, not a savior. He is just another soul lost to the darkness, another victim of the town's curse. The confrontation reaches its peak as the entity reveals its true form, a mass of writhing shadows filled with the faces of those it has claimed over the centuries. Their eyes are empty, their mouths twisted in silent screams, and their hands reach out to Thomas, pulling him toward them. He struggles, but the darkness is relentless, dragging him into its depths. The faces of the damned press against him, their cold hands clutching at his skin, their voices a chorus of despair that drowns out all thought. In that moment, Thomas realizes the full extent of the entity's power. It is not just a creature of darkness, it is the darkness itself, a force that consumes everything it touches. The town, the people, even time itself, all have been swallowed by the entity, lost to its insatiable hunger. And now it wants him. Thomas feels his strength ebbing away, his mind unraveling under the weight of the horror that surrounds him. The entity's pull is irresistible, and he knows that if he gives in, he will be lost forever. Just another face in the mass of shadows. But as the darkness closes in, something stirs within Thomas. A spark of defiance, a flicker of hope that refuses to be extinguished. With a final desperate surge of strength, he reaches for the one thing he knows the entity fears: the truth. The book he burned, the symbols on the walls, the pact made by the town's founders, all were meant to hide the truth, to keep the entity's power intact. But now, with the entity's grip tightening around him, Thomas realizes that the only way to defeat it is to confront the truth, to bring it into the light. With a cry of defiance, Thomas pulls away from the entity's grasp, tearing himself free from the shadows that cling to him. The effort nearly breaks him, but he forces himself to stand, to face the entity one last time. The shadows swirl around him, angry and desperate, but Thomas holds his ground. He knows that he cannot destroy the entity, but he can expose it, reveal the truth that it has worked so hard to keep hidden. In that final climactic moment, Thomas speaks the truth aloud, his voice strong and clear, cutting through the darkness like a blade. He speaks of the pact, of the sacrifice, of the town's betrayal. He names the entity for what it is, a creature of lies and darkness, feeding on the fear and despair of those it traps. And with each word, the entity recoils, its power weakening as the truth strips away its illusions. The church trembles as the entity's hold on Black Hollow begins to crumble. The shadows retreat, the whispers fade, and the faces in the darkness dissolve into nothingness. The entity lets out a final, anguished scream, a sound that reverberates through the town, shaking it to its very foundations. And then, just as suddenly as it began, the sound stops, and the entity is gone, its power broken by the force of the truth. Thomas collapses to the ground, exhausted and trembling. The church is silent, the oppressive atmosphere lifted. For the first time in what feels like an eternity, Thomas feels a sense of peace, a calm that washes over him like a wave. The darkness has been defeated, the curse lifted, and Black Hollow is finally free. But as Thomas pulls himself to his feet and stumbles out of the church, he realizes that the victory is not without cost. The town is still a ruin, its streets empty, its buildings crumbling. The people who once lived here are gone, their souls lost to the entity's hunger. And, though the darkness has been banished, the scars it left behind will never fully heal. The climax of despair has passed, but Thomas knows that the story of Black Hollow is far from over. The town, though freed from the entity's grasp, will never be the same. And as he walks through the empty streets, the first rays of dawn breaking through the fog, Thomas realizes that he too will never be the same. The darkness may be gone, but the memory of it, the fear and the despair, will stay with him forever, a shadow that will haunt him for the rest of his days. As he leaves Black Hollow behind, Thomas takes one last look at the town, now bathed in the soft light of morning. The nightmare is over, but the mystery remains, a puzzle that will never be fully solved. And as he walks away, the weight of the truth heavy on his shoulders, Thomas knows that some secrets are better left buried, some mysteries better left unsolved. The darkness may have been defeated, but it will always linger, waiting for the next soul to wander too close to the truth. As Thomas staggers away from the church, the once pulsating heart of Black Hollow's darkness, the cold morning light seems foreign and unwelcoming. The entity may have been defeated, but the town remains steeped in an oppressive silence, a silence that presses down on him like a physical weight. The air is heavy with the aftermath of terror, as if the very atmosphere is saturated with the lingering echoes of all the horrors that have transpired here. The town's cursed history, though no longer animated by the malevolent force that once controlled it, still clings to every shadowed corner, every crumbling building, like a malignant specter that refuses to be exorcised. Thomas feels no sense of victory as he walks through the empty streets, his steps unsteady, and his mind reeling from the ordeal he has just endured. The truth that he forced upon the entity, the truth that broke its hold on the town, now weighs heavily on him, crushing him under the burden of what he has uncovered. The whispers may have faded, and the shadows may no longer pursue him, but the knowledge of what transpired in Black Hollow, of the town's twisted pact and the souls it devoured, is a horror that will never leave him. The houses that line the streets are nothing more than hollow shells, their windows dark and empty, their doors ajar as if left open in a hurry by those who fled long ago. But Thomas knows better. No one fled this town. They were consumed, absorbed into the entity's darkness, their very existence erased by the malevolent force that fed on their fear and despair. The town is a graveyard, not just of bodies, but of souls. And as Thomas walks among the ruins, he feels the weight of every life lost here, every spirit trapped in an endless cycle of torment. The silence is oppressive, almost deafening, and Thomas finds himself yearning for even the smallest sound, anything to break the heavy stillness that surrounds him. But there's nothing. Only the faint rustle of wind through the dead leaves, the creak of old wood settling under the strain of time. The town feels frozen, caught in a moment that never ends, a purgatory where time has no meaning and escape is impossible. The realization hits Thomas like a blow. Even though the entity has been defeated, the curse that it laid upon Black Hollow may never truly be lifted. As he moves deeper into the town, Thomas begins to see them, the faces of the damned, the souls who were trapped by the entity, now free but still bound to the place where they met their end. They appear in the corners of his vision, fleeting and ghostly, their eyes hollow and filled with an endless sorrow. They do not speak, but their presence is a constant reminder of the horrors that have taken place here, of the lives that were lost to the darkness. They watch him with a mixture of longing and despair, as if they are still searching for something, some release from the torment that has held them captive for so long. The full weight of what has happened begins to settle on Thomas's mind. He realizes that by confronting the entity, by forcing it to reveal the truth, he has not just broken its hold on the town, he has also unleashed the full horror of what Black Hollow truly is. The town is not just haunted by the past. It is the past, a place where the boundaries between life and death, reality and nightmare, have been irrevocably shattered. The souls of those who were consumed by the entity are now free, but they are not at peace. They are trapped, bound to the town by the very truth that Thomas uncovered, their torment now an eternal echo in the empty streets. As Thomas continues to walk, he begins to feel a growing sense of unease, a creeping dread that gnaws at the edges of his mind. The town, though seemingly lifeless, is not at rest. There is something still here, something that refuses to let go. The shadows that once pursued him may be gone, but the darkness that created them remains, a void that waits patiently for the next soul to stumble into its depths. The entity may have been defeated, but its essence, its hunger, lingers on, woven into the very fabric of the town. Thomas comes to a stop in the center of the town square, the place where his nightmares began. The ground beneath his feet feels cold, lifeless, and as he looks around, he realizes that he is standing in the exact spot where the pact was sealed, where the town's leaders offered up their own descendants to the darkness in exchange for prosperity. The weight of that realization is crushing, and Thomas feels as though the very ground is pulling him down, dragging him into the abyss that has swallowed so many before him. In that moment, Thomas understands the true horror of Black Hollow. The town is a trap, a snare set by the entity to lure the curious, the desperate, and the lost. It feeds on their fear, their despair, drawing them deeper into its web until they are consumed, just as the town's founders were consumed by their own greed and ambition. The cycle of horror and madness is unending, and Thomas realizes with a sickening certainty that he has not escaped it. He has only delayed the inevitable. The faces of the damned appear around him, their expressions pleading, their eyes filled with a desperate hope that Thomas cannot fulfill. They are trapped as he is trapped, bound to this place by the weight of the truth that he uncovered, the knowledge that he has uncovered. The truth that broke the entity's hold on the town is a double-edged sword. It has freed the souls from their torment, but it has also bound them, and Thomas, to a fate worse than death, an eternity of knowing the horror that has taken place here, and the certainty that it will happen again. Thomas feels the pull of the abyss beneath him, the darkness that waits to claim him as it has claimed so many before. He knows that he cannot stay in Black Hollow, but he also knows that leaving will not free him. The town has marked him, and the horror he has experienced will follow him wherever he goes. The darkness is not just in the town, it is in him, a stain on his soul that will never wash away. As he turns to leave, Thomas feels a cold hand on his shoulder, and he freezes, his heart pounding in his chest. The hand is not physical, but its grip is strong, unyielding. It is the town, the darkness, the entity that still lingers in the shadows, refusing to let him go. Thomas knows that he must leave, but the terror that grips him is overwhelming, paralyzing him with fear. He can feel the abyss opening beneath him, the darkness reaching out to pull him in, to make him part of Black Hollow's eternal nightmare. With a final desperate effort, Thomas pulls away from the grasp of the town, his legs trembling as he forces himself to move. The faces of the damned watch him as he walks away, their eyes filled with a sorrow that cuts him to the core. He can feel their pain, their despair, as if it were his own, and he knows that he will never escape it. The town may be behind him, but its darkness is inside him, a part of him now, a shadow that will haunt him for the rest of his life. As he crosses the town's boundary, Thomas feels the weight of Black Hollow lift slightly, but the relief is fleeting. The road ahead is long and uncertain, and the knowledge of what he has uncovered will never leave him. The abyss, though out of sight, is still there waiting, and Thomas knows that it will never truly let him go. The terror he has experienced, the fear and the madness, are not confined to Black Hollow. They are a part of him now, a darkness that will follow him wherever he goes. The sun rises as Thomas walks away from Black Hollow, but its light feels weak, insubstantial, unable to dispel the shadows that cling to him. The world around him seems distant, unreal, as if he is walking through a dream that he cannot wake from. The terror of Black Hollow is over, but the nightmare has only just begun. The abyss of terror, the darkness that consumed the town, is now a part of Thomas, a shadow that will haunt him for the rest of his days. As he walks away, the town fades into the distance, a dark blot on the horizon, but its presence remains, a constant, oppressive weight on his soul. The abyss of terror is not just a place, it is a state of mind, a darkness that has taken root in Thomas's heart. The knowledge of what he has seen, of what he has uncovered, will never leave him, and he knows that the darkness will always be there, lurking in the shadows, waiting for the moment when it can pull him back into the abyss. In the end, Thomas is left with the knowledge that some horrors cannot be defeated, only survived. Black Hollow may be behind him, but its darkness will never truly let him go. The abyss of terror, the shadow that it has cast over his soul, is a part of him now, and it will haunt him until the day he dies. The nightmare may be over, but the terror will never end. Thomas finally escapes Black Hollow, but as he leaves the town behind, the line between reality and nightmare becomes increasingly blurred. The sense of relief he should feel is fleeting, almost non-existent, as if the darkness that plagued the town has latched onto him, following him into the world beyond its borders. The road ahead stretches endlessly, winding through dense, oppressive woods that seem to close in on him, blocking out the light of the sun. The air is thick, heavy with the lingering scent of decay and something more sinister, a smell that reminds him too much of the town he just left behind. Every step Thomas takes away from Black Hollow feels like walking through molasses, his body heavy and sluggish as if the very air around him is resisting his departure. His thoughts are a chaotic storm, swirling with memories of the horrors he faced, the faces of the damned, and the whispers that still echo in his mind. The town may be behind him, but its presence lingers, a shadow that clings to him, whispering doubts into his ear. Did you really escape? Or are you still trapped in the nightmare? Just another ghost in the town's long history of lost souls. The road eventually leads him to a small, nondescript motel at the edge of a town he does not recognize. The place is eerily quiet, with only a few cars parked in front and no signs of life. The neon sign flickers weakly, casting a sickly light over the gravel parking lot, and Thomas hesitates for a moment before entering. The lobby is deserted, the air inside stale and musty. The woman behind the counter doesn't look up as he approaches, her attention fixed on the old TV set playing static in the corner. When she finally hands him the key to his room, her eyes are dull, lifeless, as if she too is a part of the strange, dreamlike reality that now surrounds him. The room itself is drab and outdated, with peeling wallpaper and a single dim bulb hanging from the ceiling. The bed creaks under Thomas's weight as he sits down, and he feels an overwhelming sense of fatigue, as if the ordeal in Black Hollow has drained him of all energy. But sleep does not come easily. Every time he closes his eyes, he sees the faces of the townspeople, their hollow eyes staring back at him, pleading, accusing. The whispers return, louder now, filling the room with a sense of dread that makes the walls feel as though they are closing in on him. Desperate for a moment of peace, Thomas leaves the motel room and steps outside, hoping that the cool night air will clear his mind. But the darkness outside is suffocating, the trees that surround the motel looming like silent sentinels, their branches twisting in unnatural shapes. The night is eerily still, with no sounds of crickets or rustling leaves, just an oppressive silence that seems to stretch on forever. Thomas walks to the edge of the parking lot, his footsteps crunching on the gravel, and looks back at the motel. The building is barely visible in the darkness, the flickering neon sign the only source of light. For a moment, he considers leaving, driving away from this place and never looking back. But something stops him. A feeling of being watched, of being trapped, not by the motel, but by something far worse. As the night drags on, Thomas's sense of reality begins to unravel further. He starts to notice small, unsettling details. His reflection in the bathroom mirror doesn't quite match his movements. The shadows in the corners of the room seem to shift and pulse, and the whispers, the whispers, seem to grow louder the more he tries to ignore them. He feels as though he's caught in a loop, living the same moments over and over again, trapped in a nightmare that he cannot wake from. The motel room becomes a prison, the walls closing in, the ceiling pressing down, and Thomas begins to question if he ever truly left Black Hollow at all. In a moment of sheer panic, Thomas rushes to the door and flings it open, only to be met with the same suffocating darkness that surrounded the town. The trees, the gravel lot, the flickering sign, it all seems to shift and blur before his eyes, as if the world around him is unraveling, revealing the truth beneath the surface. He stumbles back into the room, his heart pounding, and collapses onto the bed, his mind racing with fear and confusion. The whispers are deafening now, filling his head with voices that are both his own and not his own, voices that speak of despair, of hopelessness, of a darkness that will never release its grip on him. As the hours pass, Thomas loses all sense of time. The night seems to stretch on endlessly, with no sign of dawn. He tries to sleep, but the nightmares are relentless, pulling him deeper into a darkness that feels all too familiar. The faces of the townspeople, the shadowy figure from the church, the entity that consumed Black Hollow, they all haunt his dreams, blending together into a single, terrifying vision of a world where the boundaries between reality and nightmare have been erased. He wakes in a cold sweat, his body trembling, and realizes with a sinking heart that he may never escape the terror that has taken root in his mind. In a final act of desperation, Thomas decides to leave the motel, to drive until he can no longer feel the town's presence looming over him. But as he steps outside, he is met with an unsettling sight. The road that once led to the motel now stretches out into an endless, fog-shrouded void. There is no town, no other buildings, just an infinite expanse of darkness that seems to pulse with a malevolent energy. The motel, once a sanctuary, now feels like a trap, and Thomas knows that no matter how far he drives, he will never escape what lies beyond the fog. The realization hits him with a cold, numbing dread. He is still in Black Hollow, or perhaps Black Hollow is in him. The town, with its cursed history and malevolent entity, has become a part of him, a shadow that will follow him wherever he goes. The whispers, the shadows, the faces of the damned, they are all pieces of the town's curse, and Thomas knows that he will carry them with him for the rest of his life. As the fog begins to close in around him, Thomas feels a crushing sense of inevitability. He cannot outrun the darkness, cannot escape the nightmare that has consumed him. The town's curse is unbreakable, a cycle that will repeat over and over, claiming new souls, drawing them into its endless night. Thomas is just another victim, another lost soul in a town that devours all who enter, leaving nothing but shadows and whispers in its wake. The final moments are a blur of terror and despair. The fog envelops him. The whispers rise to a deafening crescendo, and the darkness swallows him whole. The motel, the road, the world beyond, all fade into nothingness, leaving only the oppressive, suffocating void. Thomas feels himself falling, descending into an abyss from which there is no escape, no hope, no light.